My name is Abbie Fish. I'm a ex-swimmer, I guess is the best way to say that. Maybe a swammer if you want to get technical. I swam my whole life. I competed at the University of Georgia. I tried out for 2 Olympic teams. And yeah, swimming was just like a big part of my life for a long, long period of time. I started when I was 4 and I retired when I was 25. And I'm 31 now. And yeah, going through a retirement of anything at the age of 25 was not really what I expected for my life, but was something that obviously I had to transition out of and do to move on to like the next phase. So I still love swimming. I still swim. I'm actually a swim coach, and I own and operate a virtual swim coaching business. So swimming is still like kind of in my right side pocket. But kind of the like ebbs and flows of my own career. Some people would be surprised to know that I'm swim coaching just because my own career didn't end the way that I really wanted it to. But I kind of found the silver lining and made a full circle kind of recovery through that and found my love and passion for the sport again. And I started coaching. So it's a pretty awesome job, in my opinion.
Incredible, and we're gonna dive into what you do now. But first, I'd like to start with your retirement.
You would have asked me to do this interview probably like 4 years ago. I would have said no, because I was in still a really bitter place with my own swimming career. I actually retired early my senior year of college, and I was medically disqualified due to a shoulder problem. So it wasn't my choice, but it was the best choice given all the options that we had and where my like physical abilities were. So yeah, I really struggled beyond that decision, knowing logically that it made sense, but emotionally I wasn't ready. So I medically got disqualified. I missed my last year of eligibility, and then I retired for like a year or so, and then I got the itch, and I came back out of retirement for like a year and a half, and then I finally re-retired kind of after I made this like full circle. I don't know how to say it right word, maybe recovery, and was more at peace with my retirement on the second time than I really was on the first time.
A story I can relate to, because I had to retirement as well for different reasons, not injuries, but due to school and choice from my federation. And I know how difficult that time period is, where it comes to you, it hasn't really necessarily been your choice, and it's just really difficult to handle. I think you're upset, you're bitter. Can you talk a little bit more about perhaps the emotions and the roller coaster that you went through during that period?
When I was swimming, I thought I owned the world. I was young. I just, thought everything revolved around me, and I definitely had an ego to me. So when retirement came, I was like, oh, no worries. I got this. Like, it's not a big deal. We're going to be fine. And the difference between the Abbie that walked into my head coach's room that decided upon retirement, like I had gone to morning practice, I had this meeting like after morning practice, and then I never went back to practice, is a completely different Abbie that sits here now. So it was a super, for me, humbling experience, but at the same time, I wasn't really in tune with my emotions for the longest time, that I just suppressed things, and I felt like, things didn't matter. And with being an athlete, you kind of always talk about just being like in the zone and very like narrow focused, that I didn't allow other things to play a role in my life. So when all this stuff started coming up, I couldn't even identify what emotions I was even feeling. Like I knew that these things existed, and it kind of sounds like, to me, it sounds stupid. It's like, oh, you should have known how to do this. You know how to do all these other things. But I was like, I don't know if I'm even sad. I don't know if I'm even mad. I don't even know how I feel. And it took me a long time to like navigate through that, to be able to be like, okay, I feel like this because of this. And I can also feel at the same time this because of that. And all of these things are allowed to like sit here and hang out with me at one point. Because I was very much like, one thing or the other. So it's like, I'm either sad or I'm happy, or either I'm mad or I'm in a good mood. It was never like I could be a lot of things at one time.
Yeah, and I think it's really common for athletes. You hear a lot of story about confusion of emotion as they retire. There's this athlete who is hyper aware when they're training of everything that's going on with their body, and including mood and how you feel in the morning and getting ready for your day of practice. But then when you retire, there's sort of like this a little bit emotionally challenged when it comes to identifying those emotions that we've been suppressing for years. We're not used to deal with anger, with sadness, with like a whole range of negative emotion that is not necessarily super useful when you're training. And I say useful, quoted useful, because I think it would be helpful for athletes to know how to deal with those emotions rather than suppress them, because it will come back. How did you handle that period? Did you have any support? Were people around you helping you out since you were still in college and you were going through your recovery? Did you feel that you had perhaps more support than others that did not retire with an injury?
I would say yes and no. The good thing about Georgia swimming is we always had post-grads that were still involved with the program and training. So there was always a lot more people than just like the physical team around you. But at the same time, when I retired, all my friends were still training, and all I ever knew was that lifestyle of like going to practice, going to class, going back to practice, going to bed. So I was almost overwhelmed with the amount of options of like things I could do with my free time. And I wasn't someone, as I said even before we started this, like I liked structure. So when I had like hours upon hours upon hours to do anything, I was like, well, I don't know what I should do, so I'm going to do nothing. And it just took me a while to make friends that were not swimming related people, try out different clubs, and actually like learn how to be a college student, but not an athlete. So I struggled, and I kind of just distanced myself from the team and from all of my friends. And yeah, I kind of spent like a year or so away from it, and I was just in a very bitter place. I didn't really talk to very many people, and I was actually heavily depressed, but I didn't know it at the time. And then the funny part is my class then graduated, and so I had already had this whole year of kind of like in my own feelings and in my own space. And then all of my actual classmates started asking me when they retired, like, how did you do this? Like, how have you gone through this? And I was like, well, this is weird. Like, I never expected to be kind of like the person that they look to for, advice. But that's kind of what started the like silver lining and the full circle appeal of what happened. And I helped some of my friends go through retirement based off of things that like I had tried. And yeah, it made me feel better knowing that like I could help someone else, which is a lot of why I like coaching and I like helping people and just being open and honest, because my honesty, like, I guess helps someone else kind of see that there is life after sport. It's just kind of hard to get to it.
This is a real testimony to you as being the go-to person afterwards, that you had come full circle. And obviously they looked at you being better than when you retired. That moment when you retired and you were still in school and your teammate was still training, but you couldn't. I've heard a lot of former athletes who have dealt with that situation and felt really lonely because this was their social network, that was their life, their teammate and coaches, and they felt that they didn't belong anymore. They wanted to be part of this, but they were not part of it fully, and yet they couldn't be part of the other group either yet. So it's sort of like an in-between life. Is this something that you can relate to as well?
Yeah, 100%. I remember when all my senior year classmates got their senior rings, and like I never got one because I didn't swim my senior year. And when I went to graduation, I was obviously invited to like the athlete graduation, but I didn't train. So I was like around all my friends in these pictures with the coaches, but I still kind of had like some bitterness towards my coaches and just in general, the whole decision. So that's why I only picked like some of my best friends that I still talk to this day, are the people that I hung out with during that time. And they kind of like saw me and saw what I was going through more so than, other teammates of mine that I wasn't as close to. So yeah, I just kind of picked and choose. And even there, I just felt uncomfortable and awkward and like I didn't fit in and I wasn't supposed to be there. And we even have like a group message that's like everyone in our class from UGA. That's like every Christmas, people are like, Merry Christmas, go Dogs, like all this stuff. And for the first few years, I was like, I feel weird, like talking to you guys. Like I didn't do it. I didn't do it right. And, we kind of like, woe is me. But now I'm like, oh, hey guys, what's going on? We're 10 years out of college. What's everyone doing?
Yeah, now you've been able to digest and sort of make peace with everything. How about the physical challenges, if anything? Like obviously your body went from training so many hours to much less, and also having to deal with rehabilitation. So how did you handle all the changes?
I needed surgery on my shoulder, and I just kept pushing it off, pushing it off, pushing it off. Kind of like what you're saying with the negative emotions and the, injuries. Like you're just told to kind of like get through things and do it. And that was and is still can be my mindset now, if I kind of like run on the same gear. But yeah, I was very happy when I retired for the fact that like my body was able to heal. When I started going to like a different physical therapist, I had 3 surgeries actually on my shoulder post-retirement. And then I started going to therapy for my mental health. And I felt like everything, it took a while, but it did eventually elevate for me being in a different place and just having a different mindset. And my attitude for the last couple years of college was just, when I was swimming, was not great. So I finally felt like I was like, oh, I can like enjoy college and have a good time and swim if I want to, and not feel like I have to do all of these things and, suppress all of these things to just not deal with what I'm needing to deal with. So it was good, and it was needed. And that's why I started training again. And I actually started training, and then I started training again with UGA, and I was like back under my coaches. And it was just kind of like this whole thing of like, wow, you're faster than where you were in college. And it was just like, well, I'm happier and I'm in a way better place and my body feels better, that like I should have done this 4 years ago, but you obviously can't change things.
Yeah, and the emotional release, I think, is huge, of being able to deal with just your mental health in general, combined with the proper rehab of your body and rest. I think that's has a huge effect on performance that's completely underestimated, right? I mean, both in your sport and my sport, it's enormous amount of training, very little recovery, and it just takes a toll on your body physically and mentally. Did you have a time where you were doing like the yo-yo after the yo-yo in terms of like training after you actually retired from the sport? I think a lot of like swimmers, synchronized swimmers and other athletes sort of like go through like burst of training intensely, even though they're retired, and then nothing, and then training, and they go like this. Did you find some sort of balance?
Like I got to a better place mentally, but my mindset was, as a regular human being, that I didn't work out that day if I didn't work out for like 4 hours. So I'd go through these spurts where I was like insane about exercise and, super fit, super lean, like looked like I was still training. And then I'd be like, why am I doing this? Like, I don't have to be doing this, or, I'm hurting myself still because my shoulder's not healed. And so I do this like up and down. And I wasn't fresh enough at that point to like get back into hardcore swimming training. I dabbled in triathlons for a while and did a half Ironman kind of like on a whim. But like some of my friends turned into professional triathletes, and I was like, oh, I should just do that because it makes sense that I've been doing this, that I should just like do that. And then I was just like, I don't really want to be training this much. But at the same time, my mindset was like, we're not doing enough if you're not like getting after it every single day. So I feel like I moved around a ton after grad school, because I actually went to grad school at UGA and was still going through this like yo-yoing process and training and not training and all this stuff while I was there. That it wasn't until my very last move when I lived in Florida, that just where I lived, there was only one master's team and there wasn't really a good club team, that I finally like didn't really have the opportunity to swim with people of my own speed, that I stopped just swimming, and it was kind of like a natural like just distancing. I was still working within the sport, that I finally was like, oh, well, I can like swim if I want to swim, and I can also swim if I don't want to swim, and like it's all okay if I don't go to the pool for like 3 months, like you'll be fine. So I feel like I have a much better relationship with it now that I finally had that place where I could just kind of pull away from it naturally. And now I'm like, okay, do I want to swim today? And my mindset's like, no, I don't want to get cold. And the next day it's like, do I want to swim today? I'm like, yeah, it sounds great. And I do that, and it's way more balanced and more fun.
Yeah, and I think it takes a lot of experimenting with choices. Like as athletes, you often don't have a lot of choices. You have choices about your motivation for that year and attending practice, but not really like the structure of your day and what you get to do every day. And I think it takes a lot of time to adjust to being able to choose everything in your day, right? So that's quite interesting. And before we go on to talk about you returning to, I guess, swimming in the pool as a coach, I want to ask you about your goal, your initial goals as a swimmer. My guess is you wanted to go all the way, or at least you had your eyes on the national team. You went to some of the Olympic trials. How did you come to terms, or have you come to terms with perhaps not achieving all the goals and stuff that you wanted to do?
Swallowing that has been probably the hardest thing to swallow, because I think it's weird when you believe something so fully, like you're capable of something. And I used to dream about, being at Olympic trials and hitting the wall and seeing first or second and making the Olympic team. And that dream was like so vivid that it felt like it should have happened. So when all of these things unraveled in a different way, but I still feel like I had that ability, but then my body started kind of like, fighting against me. And I just got into this like dark place. It was like I couldn't see straight, and I couldn't see that dream anymore. So yeah, it's one of those things where I do believe that like I wouldn't be coaching had I made the Olympic team. I think if I would have done everything that I did, like won a gold medal or whatever it was, I probably wouldn't have had this dance that ended me back up on the pool deck. So I'm thankful for that. But at the same time, I won't lie and say that, for the majority of my life, like that is all I ever wanted. And that is all I ever thought about. So it's weird, like, as I said at the very beginning with the emotions, to realize that you can have two compounding things happening simultaneously inside of you. And like, that is okay. Like one doesn't have to trump the other, or one means more than the other. It just means that like at one point this was my whole world. And then at the next point, this is my whole world. So yeah. I would be lying if I said, I'm happy I didn't make the Olympic team. Like, I don't think anyone would say that if they tried out.
Yeah, and I think, it's obvious, like anybody that is getting so close to it and misses it, it's really hard to deal with. But I think specifically in your profession now, it's really important to be able to recognize the conflicting emotions that this bring to you as a person, and how to handle that as you're coaching other people. I think a lot of athletes go into coaching by default because they don't know what else to do. And often you bring with you, if you haven't done that personal emotional work, you bring with you a lot of baggage, and it's important to deal with. So let's talk about the coaching a little bit, and tell us a bit about how you came to it, how you built Swim Like a Fish, and what you enjoy about it.
Like most athletes, when they retired from swimming or any sport, I was super lost. My thought process for a professional life working goal was, okay, I've had a shoulder problem for a couple years. I've had a lot of physical therapists that were great. So naturally I should study exercise science and become a physical therapist and help other swimmers with their shoulder problems. And it was just very black and white. But after I retired, I was kind of swimming. I was also studying strength and conditioning for my master's. And I was working at a PT clinic, and I didn't not enjoy it, but I didn't love working at a physical therapy clinic. And so I was just like, do I really want to do this for the next what seems like 30, 40 years of my life? And I was like, well, not really. But my path had always been that. So I'm actually really thankful for the time that I had in grad school beyond college, because I felt like I had the ability to A, have a college experience, and B, take advantage of all the things that the University of Georgia had for, learning how to do my finances, going to the career center, all these things I didn't do when I was swimming that actually I felt like applied me to be in the real world more so than more training would have done. So yeah, I ended up dating someone who was a swim coach, and they kept inviting me to come back to practice, but practice for the club team happened to be where Georgia trained. And I was like, no, I am not going to the pool deck. I do not want to see those people. I just absolutely not. And slowly but surely, it was like kind of a tug and a tug. I was like, well, why don't you just think about it? Like, coach like the 8-year-olds, like, just, come back. And I was like, no, 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 no. And then eventually the no turned into a yes. And it was like one day I came back to the pool deck, and then it was like, okay, I'll come back like on Thursday. And then next thing I know, I was coming back every single day. And that kind of snowballed into me getting back in the water, but then I was coaching, and, it just kind of felt like home, to be honest. And I distinctly remember the 6-year-old that came into the pool deck one day, and they had the massive Speedo backpack, and it's like down to the back of their shins, and they're like walking with their goggles on, and their like cap is like half on, and they're just going to practice. And I was like, I remember being that kid. Like, I remember being that excited. And I think that's kind of what I needed to see and know, to get away from more of like the negative space I was at and become more of a positive role model for these kids, because they saw me as someone who achieved a lot, but I had saw myself as someone who achieved nothing. And so once I got more into their mindset, I started feeling better about myself.
Yeah, and I think this is really rewarding. I've heard a fair bit from athletes saying that they felt they didn't celebrate what they achieved. They didn't feel positive about their career, and it's kind of sad. You spend so much time and so many early years of your life. Those are critical years doing something incredible, really. Even if you don't attend the Olympics, it's still an incredible achievement for a young person. And I think we really often lose track of this. So I think it's rewarding to be able to see that in the eyes of someone else, and at least it builds you up a little bit. You have a little bit of a unusual coaching and coaching business, perhaps in what we're used to of like the head coach being on the pool deck and working for a club or for a college team. Can you tell us a little bit about how your days look like, and dive into a little bit more into the business, really?
I mean, to give you a little bit of backstory, the first thing I did after I graduated from grad school was I got an internship working out at USA Swimming in Colorado Springs. And that internship was in the national team department, specifically like within they call it their high performance division, but all the people that work in there basically do race analysis for the national team athletes and junior national team athletes. So this was my first experience where I, A, wasn't a swimmer, and then B, I was around these like coaches that were like, they coached athletes, but they really didn't do the daily, like day-to-day coaching. And I absolutely loved it. I was like solely convinced that was going to be my job for the rest of my life, and that's all I wanted to do. And it was just like this most amazing thing. But as I went through it, there's only a couple people that are actually doing that at USA Swimming. They've been there for a really long time. And I was like, well, I don't really want to just do it for like these 20 athletes. Like, I feel like anyone around the world should be able to get a service like this and it be helpful for their swimming. Like, I could have benefited from it, and I was never like an Olympian. So I set out on this path after that internship where I was like, I generally know that I want to do this, but I have absolutely no idea how I'm going to do this. So I started taking some jobs, and my first few jobs that I took incorporated some video work, but they did have like the regular coaching duties. And I didn't ever really like regularly coaching, like full-time coaching, predominantly from the fact that like the job itself is super stressful. There's not a lot of time. And if you're a woman, you add in the, ability to have a family and all that stuff. I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do any of this or all of this. So it just seemed like I didn't want to pigeonhole myself into that. But at the same time, I loved the biomechanics, and I was like, oh, this is super cool. I'm kind of a swim nerd. I've always liked swimming like that. So let's kind of keep forging through this path. So yeah, I ended up going to the race club, which was like, in USA Swimming's terms, kind of like the first postgraduate team to have Olympians train post-college. And they did a whole bunch of like online stuff, but in-person things, plus some scientific testing. And that was kind of the first, like, I got off the deck and into the online realm kind of jump. And it taught me a lot. And I realized through that job that I was like, okay, I can do this. I just have to create a platform for myself to do this and then make it virtual so anyone around the world can get access to it. So I went through one other position and then ended up starting my own business called Swim Like a Fish. And that is our goal. Our goal is to help swimmers anywhere around the world get faster through video analysis and race analysis, and just general swim technique education. So I love it because it still has to do with swimming. It allows me to travel and have very much control of my schedule, even though I feel like my schedule is like out of control constantly. But that's a good thing because every day is different. And yeah, it's kind of crazy. I like look back and everything makes sense to where I got. When I was, sitting there trying to look forward, I had like literally no idea where I was going. I just took the next best step that I thought it was right at the time and went for it. And then when it was ready to make a change, made the next change.
Yeah, it's really inspiring to hear your story and a different step that you went through to be able to craft basically your own business and journey to something that really fits you and your personality and your values, right, and what you like. How difficult was it to learn and deal with the business side of things? You obviously knew the biomechanics, you had studied that, you're an expert in swimming. What about the other side? How was that?
I am happy that I studied something in college that applies to what I do. So like the exercise science and the strength and conditioning masters, like that all helps me coach. But in order to run a business and have a budget and have people work for me and all of that, like, whew, that's been a complete, like, an utter shock. But it's been good because, like, at the same time, I worked under all these other people. So I learned a lot about management styles when I was getting managed in these different roles to know, what I liked, what I didn't like, and how to kind of find the right fit. I do think being a part of a team and being around, a lot of friends and like-minded people, from a hiring perspective, you have to bring in the right people to be on your team. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. So I feel like once I kind of tapped into some of those things that were part of other areas in my life, it helped me grow into a business owner. But yeah, I look back on college and I'm like, man, I wish I would have gotten like an MBA, or maybe I studied like a minor in marketing or something, because everything that I've learned, I've self-taught myself. And it's probably the hardest way to do it. But I mean, at the same time, it also has worked out. It's just, it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I'm going to be an entrepreneur when I'm 31. I had no idea. So I just picked what I knew was best at the time. And it's all, it's all worked out looking backwards.
Yeah, and you seem to have taught yourself pretty well, because I think you guys are doing great. You talked about teamwork and management style. Are there specific skills that you attribute to swimming that you feel you're using on a daily basis?
The general kind of like traits of, time management is key. Like I'll show you my planner from last month. So, obviously there's COVID happening, but like this was my planner for the month of December. So time management, like being organized, being able to keep track of just, when I'm supposed to have this interview versus what I'm going to do later this day, and not having someone direct me, like not having a coach is different. Also being goal oriented. I think it's different with swimming because you have such structured goals. It's like, I want to go this time, and this time equates to this standard, and then I can go to this meet, and it's all very black and white. That you can create any goals that you want whenever or with whatever you're doing professionally. So you may have a boss that checks in with you every 3 months, or it's an annual check-in or whatnot. But, I create different goals for myself. I'm like, this month I want to achieve all of these things. And the next 6 months, like I'm hoping to see this, and just constantly like reevaluating myself, which it came from swimming. It's just the way that I do that is in a different avenue. But yeah, I mean, hard work, determination, narrow focus, all those things can come in and treat me really, really well. But then on the flip side, it's like there always has to be a balance with stuff, because I can get into the weeds to swim like a fish, and then I'm like, oh gosh, it's like 4 o'clock in the morning, like someone needs to go to bed now, and that's me. So yeah,
that sounds about right. Work-life balance is definitely a top skill for athletes. We didn't have much balance when we were athletes, and I think it's something that you need to learn afterwards.
Yes.
Any advice or recommendation or things that you would have done yourself differently with retirement, or your transition out of sport, not that you've done it and you've had a few years behind you? What have you learned, and what would you want to share with athletes that are going through it?
like, I mean, part of the reason I picked to do this interview is like, I think what you're doing is great. And I actually vividly remember me wishing that I had something like this, like there was an offering like this when I was transitioning out of sport. Because I felt very much like I was on my own island. Like I had coaches that I could talk to, but you know, their priorities were the athletes that were currently training. So I felt very isolated. So taking advantage of things like Athlete Soul and other opportunities, whether it would be within the NGBs, if they offer any sort of transition beyond your sport, even if you feel like you don't need it, which I probably would have been like that at the time. I'm like, I don't need this like program, like whatever, I'm fine. It is good to go through because the amount of growth that I have from who I know, what I know who I was at that point to who I am now is very different. And I didn't know that I had that much room for growth and that much room that needed to be grown into to get through it. So I would definitely say take advantage of opportunities that you have and talk to people. Like if it's just listening to this interview and you're like, wow, I really resonate with that. Well, there's 10 other people just like me that have this exact same story, and that ability can create connection. And that connection is huge because that connection can be healing. So yeah, if you feel like this and this is something you're going through, like you're not alone and you're not on an island. And I wish someone would have said that to me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great message. And it's a great message of hope because I think there is a little bit of hopelessness when you retire and you feel that perhaps the best years or the passion that you had is all behind you. Well, actually, there can be plenty of great passion and a lot of great achievement after you retire from sport and there's a lot to achieve. You've mentioned a few times that you feel different now than you were when you retired. Can you tell us in what way and the growth that you have had over the last several years?
So my aunt and I are really close, and she told me this, which I'm sure doesn't apply to every single person in the world, but she was talking to me about people who stay in school. So like if you go to medical school right after you go to college and say you don't get out into the real world until you're like 30 or 32, depending on how long your residency is. She said that there was a study done on those people that the longer they stay in school, the actually like the less, I don't know how to say this right without, I don't want to be offending anyone who's in medical school, but when you get into the real world, really forced to mature and grow up and kind of turn into that adult, that a lot of times those people, because they've been in school for so long, they're a bit delayed comparatively to someone who's been in school, been out of school and in the real world and working jobs and kind of asking themselves and trying to figure out what kind of person they want to be. So I kind of feel like there's these two distinct parts of me. There's the one who swam, who was very unaware and just very like singularly focused. And then there's me now who is, I'm very broadly focused. I have a lot of passions. There's a lot of things that I want to achieve, whether it's personal, professional, or anywhere in between. And there's a level of like peace and balance inside of myself that I didn't feel when I was just swimming and that was my whole world. Even though if I could talk to myself, the other self would argue that they feel all of those things. I just didn't know that. So the amount of growth from the emotional perspective and from going to therapy and learning how to articulate things that I couldn't put words to, it's like opened up these doors into pieces of me that I didn't know existed at the time. And I just feel like I'm a completely different version of the person that I was 10 years ago.
Yeah, and it's a perfect image because that process of identity formation, personal reflection, identifying your values and what you want in life is usually something that happens early on in college when you leave home. But I think for a lot of athletes, it's pushed to the side because you have to be focused on your career. Mm-hmm. And that process ends up happening after you retire, at least for quite a lot of athletes. And it's a revelation often of how much more you can be in addition to be an incredible athlete. So I love that message, and I love what you shared today on your interview, and thanks for taking the time. I much appreciate it. Is there anything you want to tell us about where we can find you or follow you for Swim Like a Fish?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on social media. So if anybody is on Instagram and they want to learn about swimming, there's a lot of swimming tutorials on there. But my Instagram handle is and then A Fish, and then the number 1. And then we're also on Facebook. It's Swim Like a Fish on Facebook. And then the website itself, where you can see kind of like what I do and learn more about me, is www.swimlikeafish.org. So I'd love to connect with people. If anyone even wants to just shoot me a DM on something in either Facebook or Instagram, if you want to talk or you have a question or you're like, hey, I really connected with you, I'm super open to that as well. Because once again, like, my retirement became easier once I started helping other people retire. And I won't say that like I look back and I'm still like, oh, I'm 100% okay with everything that happened. So just the more healing that comes from that, the easier everything gets.
Well, thank you, and thanks for taking the time. Thanks for everything you do to help athletes, and we'll certainly share all your information as well.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Abbie.